Welcome to episode 4. This is, of course, key to your topic 4 U.S. history textbook, which is entitled Establishing a New Nation. I prefer to call my episode A New Day, primarily because it is a new day for the newly founded United States of America. The last time we checked in on the American Revolution, of course, the Patriots are going to win that war. That war is going to culminate with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, which, among its many provisions, officially recognizes the United States of America for the first time in world history. Now that we have a new country, now we have to deal with the business of actually acting like an independent nation. And that's what we're going to cover in this episode. So let's get started. Some of the players. There are many, but I'm only going to focus on a few that you absolutely positively need to remember. Alexander Hamilton, of course, that amazing Broadway show is based on him, Lin-Manuel, sorry. I think I'm messing up that guy's name, but it's okay. He won't mind. Alexander Hamilton, one of my favorite founding fathers, for reasons that I'll share later. James Madison, who is considered the father of the Constitution. I promise I'm going to ask that on a test, and you better not get it wrong. Roger Sherman. And let's see, this guy over here, John Jay. I love that robe thing he's got going on. And then finally, there are a bunch of people here. I apologize for the fuzziness of this image, but I had nothing to do with it. I blame the Library of Congress for it. That is a rendering of the Constitutional Convention where many of our founding fathers were convening in order to essentially create a new structure for our government. So these are some of the people that we're going to be focusing on. So what's the plot? We have a young country that now is trying to pick up the pieces and function like an independent country should. And the first model of government is going to be the Articles of Confederation. That's the structure for our government. That's how we're going to run. That's how the 13 now states, not colonies, are going to govern themselves under the banner and auspices of the United States of America. It seemed like it would work, but of course, it's not going to work because pretty much everything is going to go wrong that you could imagine under the Articles of Confederation. Why? Because the Articles of Confederation gave way too much power to individual states. You could not create a strong federal government, and you certainly can't create a strong federal government with no police power. In other words, if you have no military, you have no soldiers to protect the citizens or to keep order, what are you going to do? On top of that, the Articles of Confederation don't really provide a way to generate tax revenue because each of the states is determined to take care of their own stuff. They don't care about what's happening in their neighboring states. They only care about themselves. And so with no money or military, what you're going to have is a near collapse of a very young United States. That's going to, of course, cause us to completely rethink the Articles of Confederation and our government structure. So, the highlights. These are the things I absolutely need you to focus on and remember for this topic. First, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This ordinance establishes a means to bring additional states into the Union. This guarantees expansion. It is never our intention to stay small. It is never our intention to only have 13 states. There's a whole lot of land around us at this point. And there are certainly founding fathers and citizens now who have their eyes set on exploring, expanding, and taking advantage of the land around them. And then, of course, the Articles of Confederation, which I just mentioned. So many problems. You have a unicameral form of government. Uni means one, so you have one branch. And that's Congress. On top of that, states and not Congress could declare war and borrow money. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Congress had no power to do anything in relation to war or borrowing money. And each state was essentially considered, I don't want to say its own little country, but you have one vote per state to pass laws, and you have to have 9 out of the 13 to make it. Each state has its own power, and you're never going to get that many states to agree. Especially when we start talking about the regional differences between, say, North and South, which are going to become more prominent as time goes on. Of course, this form of government, this government, I should say, I'm going to say a branch of government, but this government at this point could not tax, and they could not force states to provide money. So what do? How united are you if you have no money and you have no real police force in order to protect everyone? And Congress has no power. They can't raise the military. They pretty much can't do anything. And so we already have a major problem brewing. And because of all of these weaknesses, we're going to have this issue. Daniel Shays was a Revolutionary War vet. He was a farmer who, of course, he's struggling. All of these guys are struggling. They're coming back. They're probably owed money for serving in the war. The government has to figure out how to pay these men for their service in the American Revolution. And now they have to go back to being farmers. But the problem is, now with all these taxes that states are levying in order to pay war debts, the farmers can't pay. So Daniel Shays is like, hey, no, I'm not doing that. Nah, fam, not having it. And so what's eventually going to happen? And Daniel Shays, by the way, hails from the state of Massachusetts. What's going to happen is that the farmers are going to essentially rebel, and Daniel Shays is considered one of the leaders of that. He and a few leaders are going to be arrested and sentenced to death. FYI, they're not executed. But the problem with Shays' rebellion, remember, this is a young country. We were born out of rebellion. And to have another rebellion take place so soon after we'd become a country, so soon after we're trying to establish some type of normalcy and consistency, it really exposed the fact that the national government, the federal government, really is very weak and has no power. That we have no power to stave off any type of rebellion or uprising. Something has to be done, or we will not be a country for long. And so we have the Constitutional Convention. Now, here is something that we need to remember. It was not the intention of most of those who participated in the convention to discard the Articles of Confederation. The original intent was to simply repair it or fix it. But as the convention wore on and as more discussions took place, they essentially reached a place where they realized we just need to throw the whole thing out and start all over again. And out of that, you're going to have two different groups. You're going to have the Federalists who do not want to repeat or a remixed version of the Articles of Confederation. They want a strong federal government while at the same time still protecting states' rights. And James Madison, we mentioned earlier, he wants to encourage the best but restrain the worst. That's what he believes the federal government should be able to do under his vision of what the government should look like. Anti-federalists, on the other hand, these are your states' right advocates who argue for a limited, and I didn't finish that, who argue for a limited federal government. They want strong states' rights. They do not want another King George, because that's the whole fear that a lot of anti-federalists have. The last thing they want is a strong federal government telling them what to do and micromanaging them and overtaxing them, because that's what led to the American Revolution to begin with. So they don't want that. And so at this convention, of course, you need to make sure you know the different compromises that are going to emerge. The Virginia plan offered by Edmund Randolph, he proposed a bicameral legislature where each state sends reps based on population. And he called for 2 new branches, an executive and judicial branch. Sound familiar? The problem, however, with his plan for a number of convention years is that if you're a big state, well, that gives big states or states with large populations a major advantage. So it's not fair to small states like Rhode Island. So not everyone is on board with that plan. Then we have the New Jersey plan, William Patterson, who says, nope, every state should have an equal vote in a unicameral Congress so that smaller states would have the same power as large states. Congress would have the power to tax and regulate foreign and interstate business, and His plan too calls for an executive and judicial branch. So you see how they're similar. But again, this plan is not going to be supported so much by states with large populations, because their idea is, well, wait, we have more people, we're paying more taxes, we should have more power. So something has to give. And finally, Roger Sherman. Now, this compromise goes under a couple of names. It's either called the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise, depending on which textbook you're looking at. Just remember that Roger Sherman is the major author of this compromise. It creates a bicameral legislative branch where in the Senate, each state would have the same representation no matter what their size. But in the other house, the House of Representatives, that's what the HOR stands for. I was too lazy to type the whole thing out. The number of reps will be determined by state population. And obviously, we're going to go with that. We still have that today. 535 representatives serving in Congress as we speak. Another compromise that we have to think about is the 3/5 compromise. This is probably one of the most controversial aspects of the Constitutional Convention. Sherman was also the author of this compromise. There's a dispute that breaks out between slaveholding states and your smaller states, and those smaller states that did not allow slavery. The slave states want to count their population. The free states are like, you got to be kidding. And so you have this tussle, and eventually what's going to happen is that they're eventually going to ask for 3/5 of the slave population to be counted toward the state population. It does not mean that a slave is 3/5 of a human being. That's not how it's worded in the Constitution. I think there's been some misunderstanding about that. Either way, if you're a slave, if you're enslaved, it's not good for you because you have no rights. So we see embedded in the Constitution our reference to slavery here. It's not something that's looking to abolish slavery. It's looking at how to essentially accommodate those states that have slaves as a part of their population. But without this, I highly doubt that the Constitution would have gotten as far as it got. It's a tough thing. This is very controversial. What it shows you, however, is that the things that we did not do right from the beginning and we did not fix and we ignored, they're not going away. And when we started talking about, even at the beginning of the school year, about the regional differences, we talked about the New England colonies versus the southern colonies and the over-reliance of the southern colonies on enslaved people. How that's going to eventually turn into something near cataclysmic for the United States in the middle of the 19th century. It will be ratified. The Federalist Papers, some of which we're going to actually be reading this week, plays a major role in getting that passed. It really convinces a lot of people that, hey, we need to adopt this Constitution. In addition to that, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, of course, are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, and those were placed in the Constitution specifically to appease the anti-federalists who would not vote for the Constitution to be ratified without them. They wanted a guarantee that individual and states' rights would be protected, even with a strong federal government. Ratification of the Constitution, of course, we get our 3 branches of government, but we also have this issue of federalism, this tension between the powers of the federal government versus the powers of the state government, and how that's going to play out over time. And of course, as I said before, the Bill of Rights guarantees states have certain rights preserved and not taken from them. So, hey, I got all this done under 15 minutes. Awesome. This is your quick assessment question. I am going to be discussing this later in the week. I will tell you. Yes, that picture is something I did with my own hand because I'm too cheap to go and buy a photo, and I don't want to be sued. We looked at the 3/5 compromise, and we saw it's a red pill issue with slavery. And you know what red pills are? That's that poisonous pill that unleashes its poison essentially to kill you on the spot. If you don't deal with the red pills situations in your midst, they're eventually going to unleash their toxins and poisons and destroy the organism in which it is found. So here is your question. Be ready to answer this. I have a place in your study guide for it. I hope this helps. Play it as many times as you wish. I will see you in class. God bless. Take care. Bye-bye.